Hey friends. Tonight, we begin with a candle flickering in a crooked iron holder, a stone bench still warm from the afternoon sun, and the unmistakable scent of something stewing far too long in a cauldron. But don't worry, that odd smell isn't the start of a nightmare, it's just medieval hygiene trying its best. So before we step into tonight's journey together, make yourself cozy, pull up the blanket, let your screen dim, and if you're the kind of person who enjoys quietly fascinating, occasionally ridiculous slices of history, go ahead and subscribe. No pressure. Just like medieval law's technically optional if you're rich enough. And now let's drift softly into the world of being clean, dirty, and everything in between in the Middle Ages. A time when soap was suspicious, baths were political, and perfume was practically a weapon. Close your eyes, if you'd like, and imagine you're waking up in a tiny wooden cottage somewhere in the English countryside around the year 1273. The rooster is screaming like it owes you money. Your bed is a straw mattress that crackles like a campfire every time you move. And your hair, well, your hair has acquired its own postal code, but you're not dirty, at least not by local standards. Because in the Middle Ages, cleanliness wasn't about lemon-scented body wash or exfoliating loofahs. It was about balance between water and disease, vanity and piety, and, most importantly, between effort and utter exhaustion. Let's start with bathing, which is a far more complicated concept than your modern brain might expect. Because yes, medieval people did bathe. And no, it wasn't once per lifetime during a solar eclipse under a blood moon. In fact, in many parts of Europe especially, in the early Middle Ages people were quite fond of washing themselves. Monasteries had dedicated washing areas, nobles had private tubs, and public bathhouses were not just common, they were the medieval equivalent of your local cafe/gossip center. Picture it, a row of wooden tubs, steam rising in ribbons, servants hauling buckets of hot water from massive cauldrons, and a rotund merchant sighing contentedly as he soaks for the first time in a month. Not because he forgot, but because heating that much water took 6 people in an afternoon. Bathhouses were places of social gathering. Men and women bathed together in some regions. You heard that right, and you could catch up on local news, smooth your aching back, and get mildly drunk all at once. Some even offered snacks, wine, or, in certain less morally restrained corners of Europe, a bit more than just a sponge and small talk. But over time, the public bath fell out of fashion. Not because people suddenly enjoyed the smell of their own armpits, but because of things like plague, moral panic, and that classic medieval plot, twist the church. You see, the more people stripped off their clothes and soaked communally, the more suspicious the moral authorities became. Clean skin, it turns out, was alarmingly close to sinful skin. And by the late Middle Ages, public bathing was under attack from every side. Bathhouses were condemned, sometimes literally, and the idea of scrubbing yourself regularly became strangely controversial, but that didn't mean people stopped washing. They just got creative. Instead of full baths, many turned to partial washing, also called dry bathing. This included wiping yourself down with linen cloths, changing undergarments more often than you touched water, and relying heavily on the power of herbs and aromatic powders. For example, rosewater wasn't just for romance. People used it to rinse their hands, perfume their clothes, and cover the scent of that thing they just stepped in outside. Lavender, mint, and rosemary were tucked into garments, stuffed under pillows, or boiled into sachets that clung to the body like medieval febreze. And then, of course, came the hair. Now imagine brushing your hair without a comb that breaks every 3 strokes, and no conditioner except maybe lard. Hair care was both important and infuriating. For many, it was braided, bound, or hidden beneath layers of cloth, not for fashion, but because taming it was a weekly affair. Monks shaved theirs entirely, nuns kept theirs hidden, and peasants just tied it back and hoped for rain. But if you think medieval people didn't care how they smelled, think again. They cared deeply, they just had fewer tools, and much weirder ideas. For instance, some believed bad smells carried disease miasma theories, so good smells were like spiritual armor. People carried pomanders, small decorative balls filled with fragrant herbs, or sachets sewn into their sleeves. Some ladies even kept oranges hollowed and stuffed with cloves, gently leaking citrus into every conversation. And when it came to the royals, personal scent became a kind of diplomacy. Take Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, who allegedly bathed in rosemary and wine, or King Louis XIV of France, who preferred to drown himself in perfume rather than risk soap. He reportedly took 2 full baths in his entire life. But don't worry, he had an entire staff to perfume his body daily, because what is personal hygiene if not someone else's job? As for the teeth, oh dear. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't exist. But people still cleaned their mouths, sort of. They chewed twigs with frayed ends, used cloths dipped in salt, ash, or mint, and sometimes rubbed their teeth with powders made from crushed bones or dried herbs. Dental care was primitive, yes, but ignored. Not exactly, and when that failed, there was always the village barber surgeon, who could pull a tooth faster than you could say infection, and with roughly the same success rate as flipping a coin. Now let's talk about laundry, which was simultaneously everyone's business, and no one's favorite chore. Clothes weren't washed daily, or weekly. In fact, washing was so arduous that it became a social event. Women gathered by rivers, scrubbing, pounding, and gossiping while their arms ached from beating tunics against stones. Ashleigh, a caustic but effective cleaner, was used in place of soap. It got the stains out, sure, but it also left your clothes feeling like cardboard and your hands looking like dried apples. Undergarments were washed more frequently than outerwear, but linens were reused many times before they saw water. Which brings us to the fact that many medieval people owned very few clothes. A tunic for daily wear, another for Sunday, and if you were rich, maybe 3. So washing wasn't about staying fresh, was about making sure your only shirt didn't start walking away on its own. Now drift with me into a noble household, where the washing process looked very different. Here, servants handled the hygiene. A nobleman's bath was prepared in a large wooden tub in his solar or private chamber. The water perfumed with herbs, and the room filled with steam. He didn't just bathe, he was bathed often with oils, gentle scrubbing, and enough ceremony to rival a coronation. But even the elite didn't bathe every day. Sometimes not even every week. It was a luxury, a performance, a chance to show off your wealth, your scented oils, and the fact that you didn't need to haul your own bathwater. Up 3 flights of stairs. Cleanliness was both a virtue and a vice, praised by some, condemned by others. The church saw, too, much attention to the body as a gateway to sin. But too little, and you were mistaken for a leper, or worse, a heretic. And so medieval people walked that fine line between cleanliness and suspicion, scrubbing enough to appear presentable, but never so much that it looked indulgent. And as you settled deeper into your blanket, listening to the gentle tick of the modern clock, imagine lying in a medieval bed, wrapped in linen sheets, rinsed just last month. The scent of lavender and wood smoke drifting through the cracks in the timber-bird walls. You don't worry about the water. You don't worry about the soap. You've done your dry bath, changed your tunic, and maybe chewed a mint leaf if you're feeling fancy. You're clean enough, and in the Middle Ages, that was more than most could ask for. So there you are, freshly linened, lavender-scented, and lying beneath a sagging timber roof, drifting on the thin line between sleep and memory. And while the night settles over the thatched rooftops of the village, somewhere outside, a low rumble begins. Not thunder, not wolves. Laundry day, because if hygiene was personal, laundry was communal, noisy, and occasionally scandalous. Let's float toward the riverbank, just after sunrise, where the fog is still clinging to the water like a secret. You'll see a procession of figures, mostly women, dragging baskets, buckets, and bundles of soiled linen across dew-drenched grass. They're not just here to scrub, they're here to talk, to exchange news, to judge whose husband has the worst-smelling hose, and maybe, just maybe, to air more than just the laundry dot at the edge of the stream. Washing begins. Some kneel in the shallows. Others stand in wooden tubs, half filled with water, and lie a pungent mix made from ashes and boiled fat. They beat fabric against flat stones, twist it, slap it, soak it, and wring it until the cloth surrenders its filth. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like the village breathing. But make no mistake, laundry was work. Hard, repetitive, chronicle work. It blistered fingers, soaked skirts, and bruised backs. And it wasn't done daily. No one had the time, energy, or supply of underpants to justify that in towns. Professional washerwomen called laundresses took up the job, especially for the wealthy. They hauled clothes to rivers or public washhouses, did the dirty work, and returned the garments hours or days later, faintly fragrant and still damp. Some got paid in coin, others in bread, beer, or grudging gratitude. Of course, clothes themselves were different. Forget zippers, forget stretch fabric. Most medieval garments were rectangular constructions of wool or linen, sewn together by hand and often dyed in whatever color the local plants and your budget allowed. Bright clothes, expensive dark clothes, mysterious, undyed linen. Probably a peasant, and every piece told a story. A frayed sleeve spoke of long hours in the fields. A spotless chemise whispered of wealth and servants. A cloak with embroidery said, "I have time to sit still while someone else does everything." But cleanliness extended beyond the body and the cloth. It reached deep into the soul, or so people believed, because to be truly clean in the Middle Ages wasn't just about dirt. It was about sin, about purity of spirit, which, depending on whom you asked, had little to do with soap and everything to do with confession, fasting, and weeping into a wooden pew once a week. The church offered spiritual hygiene, and it was very popular. And yet even spiritual purity had its rival, public, P-E-R-C-E-P-T-I-O-N. A pious man who reeked like fish and forgot to wash his hands was still avoided at market. A noblewoman who wore silks but never combed her hair invited whispers and, worse, suspicion of madness. Which is why personal grooming, private, often awkward, became a silent language everyone spoke. A well-combed beard, a freshly trimmed nail, a dab of rosemary oil on a wrist. These were declarations. I care. I try. I am human. I am not diseased, but still the world remained messy. It's hard to stay clean when your entire environment is working against you. Let's walk now through a medieval street, just as the sun reaches its highest point. There's no plumbing, no garbage service, no pavement. Just narrow lanes of mud and mystery, lined with homes stacked like books on a crooked shelf. People throw waste into the streets, sometimes water. Sometimes worse, chamber pots are emptied from windows with a shouted warning. If you're lucky, horses do what horses do. Dogs roam free. Pigs wander. Chickens appear from places you swear they weren't a moment ago. And yet, there's an odd charm to it. The chaos has rhythm. The smells layered like a strange perfume sweat. Smoke, bread, manure, ale form. A signature of life. Unfiltered, raw, but unmistakably alive. Street sweepers existed. So did regulations. Some towns had rakersmen hired to clear refuse. And in large cities, there were even designated dumping grounds. But enforcement was patchy. And priorities changed depending on the plague situation or the level of local scandal. Because here's the truth. Cleanliness was always contextual in some cultures. Public baths remained respected and common, especially in Islamic Spain and parts of Byzantium, where bathing was linked to hospitality and health. A visitor might be offered a bath before food. Architecture included heated floors and marble fountains. Cleanliness wasn't just survival, it was etiquette. And not just spiritual, it was beautiful. In Baghdad, in the 9th century, there were reportedly over 1,000 bathhouses. In Cordoba, public baths sparkled under mosaics. In Constantinople, the bathhouse was as central as the basilica. But in Western Europe, where plague swept through towns like a broom made of bones, water started to look suspicious. People noticed that those who bathed regularly sometimes died faster. Correlation became causation. And soon enough, bathing was blamed for spreading disease. Open pores, they believed, let bad air in. Dampness encouraged illness. Better to sweat out the demons than wash them in. And thus, perfume became strategy. Let's pause now, in a noblewoman's chamber, just after dusk. The fire flickers low. A maid enters with a bowl of warm rosewater. The lady dips a cloth and pats her face, her neck, her wrists. Her hair has not seen water in weeks, but it is brushed, braided, and perfumed with oils imported from Venice and mixed with a drop of clove. A carved ivory comb rests nearby. A mirrored, surface-polished metal, not glass, catches her expression. She leans forward, inspects a blemish, and whispers a prayer. She smells of frankincense, of cedarwood, of silent pride, and she is not alone. Kings had court barbers, perfume masters, and valets, whose entire role was to make sure royalty didn't smell like rotting goat in front of foreign ambassadors. There were recipes, written ones, for powders made of crushed roses, violet root, orris, and even powdered ambergris, which, if you don't know, is whale vomit dried by the ocean and sold as treasure. Why? Because cleanliness, like all things in the Middle Ages, was both practical and theatrical. To be clean was to survive. To be seen as clean was to thrive. And so, as you lie still now, listening to the whisper of your own breath and the imagined creak of an old floorboard overhead, remember this. Medieval people were not filthy caricatures. They washed when they could. They tried what they had. They invented, adapted, and coped with a world that was constantly trying to undo them. They rubbed rose petals on their faces, boiled lye to clean their clothes, shared combs with siblings, and whispered to saints for healing from packs and sores. They laughed through the stink. They bathed in secret. They cleaned what they could and ignored what they couldn't. And as the stars slowly brighten over the stone towers and smoke-twisted chimneys of a world long gone, one thing is certain: they dreamed of cleanliness, just like you do. Only their soap was ash, their scrubber was a cloth, and their bedtime routine included a whispered prayer to survive the next outbreak. But they dreamed, just the same. And now, the village sleeps, except it because in the dark corners of the world, trouble breathes softly, like smoke, through the gaps in a shuttered window. Someone is coughing, not once, not twice, but again and again, until the night forgets it was supposed to be silent. And just like that, the air grows heavier. The water bucket is left untouched. The wash basin, cold. The soap, if you had any, is ignored, because this isn't a normal fever. Not something a little rosemary tea and a cold cloth can cure, no. Tonight, we enter the chapter where hygiene becomes horror, because it's time to whisper the name that once sent entire towns into lockdown before anyone knew what that word meant. The plague, yes, that plague, the Black Death. When it rolled through Europe like a thunderstorm of bones and shadows, it didn't just take lives, it took trust in cleanliness itself. Bathing, once a symbol of care, became suspect. Water, that ancient companion, was feared. And even the air turned traitor. Let's pause there. In a world without microscopes, without Pasteur or penicillin, people made do with what they understood. And what they understood was that bad smells meant bad air, and bad air meant disease. So when the plague came knocking, people answered with smoke, perfume, and prayer. Imagine now a doctor, not the kind you're used to, but one clad in a long, waxed coat, leather gloves, and a bird-like mask with glass lenses and a curved beak stuffed full of lavender, myrrh, or mint. He's not here to comfort. He's here to survive his visit. Because this outfit, now the symbol of medieval dread, was believed to protect against miasmoth, that deadly, invisible stink of rot and ruin, thought to carry sickness from one soul to the next. And so people stopped bathing, believing it opened their pores to that foul air. The rich sealed themselves indoors, their homes reeking of incense and fear. The poor, already familiar with filth, now embraced it like armor. Cleanliness was no longer virtue. It was vulnerability. Bathhouses closed, some by decree, others by silence. Those that remained open were sometimes burned, their steam mistaken for smoke from hell itself. But not everyone gave in to panic. Let's walk through a convent garden, where sisters in pale linen gowns move quietly, distilling herbs into tinctures, praying softly over boiling pots of rosemary and sage. These women are healers, midwives, caretakers of both body and soul. And though they fear the plague as deeply as anyone, they still believe in washing hands, faces, and wounds with wine, vinegar, or even lye water, painful, but clean. They bind sores, they burn soiled bandages. They believe not in cleanliness as comfort but in cleanliness as sacrifice, because tending to the sick meant touching the edge of death. And to do that, you needed faith stronger than the stench outside the convent. In crowded cities, another version of hygiene takes shape. Street sweepers return, not to clean for comfort, but to haul away the dead. Men in hoods push carts. Women toss herbs in front of doorways. People clutch pomanders and chew cloves like they might hold back the reaper, and still, water is treated with suspicion. Even barbers, the half-healers of the medieval world, who stitched wounds, pulled teeth, and occasionally set bones with equal parts alcohol and guessworks, stopped shaving their clients. Razors meant open skin. Open skin meant risk. So stubble grew. Beards flourished. The look of neglect became the mark of survival. But humans are stubborn. Even surrounded by grief and dirt and the endless tolling of death bells, people still sought beauty. They still combed their hair, even if the combs were shared. They still sprinkled herbs in their boots, even if those boots never left home. They still whispered remedies from mothers and grandmothers, burn garlic near the window, hang dried yarrow above the bed, rub crushed mint on the feet. None of it proven, all of it cherished. And even as priests gave last rites from doorways, as markets closed, and silence settled over once bustling squares, the quiet rituals of keeping clean never disappeared. They simply adapted, because cleanliness was hope. Little oil on the wrist, a rinsed face before sleep, a fresh linen sheet boiled in vinegar, these were acts of defiance, of dignity, of refusing to let rot win. Now drift with me, away from the disease-riddled streets, away from the shadow of the crow-masked doctor, and into a small country manor where the noble family has quarantined themselves for weeks. The fire burns constantly. The windows stay shut. Servants scrub every surface with wine and salt water, convinced the devil cannot cross a vinegar line. Children play with dolls scented in sage. A bored aunt soaks her hands in rosewater 3 times a day, not out of cleanliness but habit. And in the grand hall, where once feasts rang loud with laughter, a single table now holds bowls of dried fruit, hard cheese, and a wine pitcher touched only with gloves. Everyone is frightened, but everyone is clean, or at least, as clean as they believe they need to be. Now leave that manor behind, and follow a fading trail to the outskirts of a crumbling monastery, where Brother Thomas, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion, boils water in a blackened pot. He has buried 7 of his brothers. The bell no longer rings, but each morning, he wakes before the sun, scrubs his hands with ash, prays for strength, and washes the altar cloths in silence, because the ritual remains, even when the choir is gone. And here, in the stillness of this long-lost world, one truth remains as steady as stone. To clean was to remember. To bathe a dying man was to honor his life. To perfume your dress was to remind yourself you were still alive. To comb your hair, to boil your linens, to press herbs into your of it meant more than hygiene. It meant resistance. It meant ritual. It meant rhythm. And as the plague receded, like a tide of ash pulled back into the ocean, the world stepped into the light again. People returned to the baths. Children laughed at soap bubbles. Taverns reopened with new mugs and old songs. Cleanliness became possible again, not just a dream, but a practice. And now, as you lie still in your own clean sheets, far from ash buckets and vinegar-soaked linens, remember that even in the dirtiest centuries, people longed for what you now have. Not because it was easy, but because it was human, and humans, no matter the century, crave comfort, order, softness, and scent. They crave baths. They crave warmth. They crave to be seen, to be known, to be clean. Somewhere behind the velvet shadows of another medieval morning, in a chamber lit only by a sliver of golden sun filtering through a cloth-covered window, a woman leans toward a bowl of polished metal. Her breath fogs the surface. Her fingers tremble slightly, and though the reflection staring back at her is warped longer than it should be, with a nose like a fish and eyes too wide, it's still hers. Because tonight, we open the small, creaky cupboard of medieval beauty and grooming, a space filled with herbs, powders, brushes made of boar bristle, and enough creative chemistry to alarm a modern dermatologist. This isn't the beauty of TikTok tutorials or 10-step routines. This is beauty at its boldest, when people plucked their hairline for fashion, painted their faces with crushed minerals, and sometimes went blind in the name of love. Let's begin where it always begins. The face ought to be beautiful in the middle. Ages was to be pale. Not a little pale. Not healthy glow, pale. We're talking candle wax, parchment, cloud on a bleak November day pale. Because the paler you looked, the less you appeared to work outside. And the less you worked outside, the higher your social status floated. So women and some men went to alarming lengths to achieve this ghostly glow. Some used lead-based powders. Yes, lead crushed and mixed with vinegar or rosewater. It was painted gently over the face, using cloth or fingers, creating a smooth, white mask of wealth. Or so they hoped. Never mind the dizziness, or the headaches, or the peeling skin. That was the price of being ethereal. Others turned to more natural options, ground oyster shells, rice powder, or chalk dusted lightly to soften freckles, or smooth over the ravages of last season's pox. And if powder wasn't enough, they bled themselves. Not for fun, not for health. For complexion, a little bloodletting. Done by the local barber, with an alarming grin and a bowl he never quite cleaned. Was believed to balance the humors and give your skin that radiant, bloodless look prized by poets and painters. Now drift to the eyes. No mascara, no liquid eyeliner. But medieval people weren't blind to the beauty of a good stare. They darkened their lashes using burnt cork or soot, gently rubbed into the lid with a stick or a feather. Eyes were widened with belladonna dropsias from the deadly nightshade plant, which dilated the pupils and gave the eyes a glassy, love-struck look. Side effects included nausea, hallucinations, and yes, occasionally death. But oh, what a dramatic gaze on the way there. And then there were the brows. Eyebrows. The ever-shifting canvas of fashion. In some centuries, the ideal brow was non-existent. Women plucked, or even shaved their eyebrows entirely, along with part of the hairline, to create a smooth, high forehead, a sign of intelligence and refinement. Imagine the effort. No razors, no tweezers. Just patience, pain, and a sharp sliver of bone or obsidian, followed by herbal balm and whispered regrets. And yet, the result, a glistening dome of skin from brow to crown, was considered utterly enchanting. Now step with me into a perfumer's corner, somewhere deep inside a bustling medieval city. It smells like cloves and orange rind, and something faintly spicy. This is where scent becomes seduction. Perfumes were made with oils, herbs, spices, and sometimes animal products like ambergris from whales or musk from glands. No one wants to discuss before breakfast, bottled in tiny flasks, or stored in pomanders. These fragrances were dabbed behind ears, on sleeves, even woven into hair with silk threads. Perfume wasn't just about attraction. It was believed to protect the body, a fragrant shield against foul air and fouler spirits. The richer you were, the more layers you wore, and the more places you could tuck tiny scented charms beneath your corset, in the folds of your veil, or between the laces of your shoes. Which brings us, ever so gently, to hair. Medieval hair care was equal parts patience and endurance. Shampoo didn't exist, but people did clean their hair just differently. They used herbal rinses made from rosemary, nettle, sage, or vinegar. They rubbed egg yolk into the scalp, followed by warm water and a brisk combing. Sometimes lard was used for shine. Yes, lard. And if you think that's unpleasant, imagine brushing that mixture out without modern shampoo or hot water. Or time combs were prized objects, crafted from wood, bone, or ivory, often ornately carved, and passed down through families. To own a fine comb was to declare, I care about order. I respect the mirror. I do not have lice. Probably hair was braided, twisted, pinned, coiled, veiled, or simply left to flow, depending on your class, your mood, or the feast day. And for noble women, a well-arranged hairdo could take hours, dozens of pins, and the whispered envy of everyone within scent range. Men weren't immune to the grooming. obsession. A well-shaped beard was a status symbol, and a clean-shaven face marked a monk, a scholar, or someone who owed too many people money. Men rubbed oils into their beards, combed them, and sometimes curled them with small irons heated in the fire. And don't forget the teeth. Still no toothbrush, still no fluoride. But still, attention. People used twigs with frayed ends, chewed into soft bristles. They rubbed salt, ashes, or mint leaves across their gums. Some made their own powders from crushed herbs and bone. Toothaches were common, and cures were creative. Tying a dead mole to your jaw, pressing a heated iron nail to your wrist, or simply having the offending tooth yanked out by a barber who charged extra if you screamed. And if all else failed, mouth perfume, yes, it existed. Cinnamon water, clove-soaked cloth, parsley, because even in a world without selfies, people still wanted to be kissable. Now let's gently open the heavy door to a castle chamber, where a noblewoman is being dressed by candlelight. Her chemise is freshly washed, her sleeves embroidered with threads of gold. A servant braids her hair, tucks flowers into the weave, dusts her cheeks with powdered iris root. She looks in the polished metal mirror and smiles faintly. Not because she believes she's perfect, but because she believes she's ready to be seen, admired, remembered. Because medieval beauty wasn't effortless. It was art, and like all great art, it came with sacrifice. It pinched, it stung, it smudged, but it mattered, and it still echoes, in every mirror, in every bottle, in every quiet moment before a feast. A prayer, a portrait. Even now, beneath your modern lights and warm blanket, something stirs. Some small part of you knows the truth. They lived. To care for how you look is to care for who you are. To paint the face, scent the skin, pluck the brow, or oil the hair. These are not acts of vanity. They are acts of survival, of pride, of saying, I exist, I belong, I am worth looking at. And so they painted, and perfumed, and plucked, and powdered. And somewhere between the blush of rosewater and the sting of vinegar rinse, they found themselves. And now the candle burns low, a single flame, steady and small, fluttering near the edge of its wick, casting long shadows across stone and timber. The day is ending. The bells have tolled. The prayers have been spoken. The streets have emptied into silence, broken only by the distant bark of a dog, or the soft clatter of shutters being drawn shut against the chill. It's nighttime in the Middle Ages, and sleep lest necessary, often elusive waits, like a quiet visitor, just beyond the hearth. But medieval people didn't just fall into bed. They descended into night, slowly, like slipping into water, step by careful step. Because in a world without electricity, without central heating, and without the luxury of ignoring the dark, going to bed was a ritual. And so we begin in a place few ever entered without invitation. The medieval bedchamber, not always a room of opulence, sometimes just a nook behind a curtain, sometimes a shared straw mattress tucked in the corner of a cottage, but always a boundary between the public and the private, between the outside world and the whispered breath of dreams. In castles, the rich slept behind layers, layers of architecture, layers of cloth, layers of rules. A noble's bedchamber might be nested within multiple rooms first, a hall, then a solar, then the private space itself, where heavy curtains hung around, a raised bed, and the ceiling loomed like a wooden sky. The bed itself was a marvel, not just furniture, a symbol, four-postered, carved from oak, covered in furs or embroidered linens, stuffed with feathers if you could afford them, or straw, layered thick with dried herbs like lavender, mugwort, or mint, if you see OULDN, single quotes, T. above. A canopy around. Drapes pulled tight at night to keep in warmth, to keep out vermin, to keep secrets, because the bed was where everything happened. It was where children were born, where illness lingered, where marriages were whispered into permanence or not, where prayers were said, where secrets were shared, where life folded into sleep like a letter tucked under a pillow. But not everyone had a bed. The poor slept on pallets, on rush mats, on bundles of hay, layered with cloth and hope, and whatever warmth they could find. Children shared space with parents. Servants often curled up near the hearth, wrapped in cloaks, listening to the last embers sigh their way into Ashdod. There were no sleep schedules, no alarms, but there was rhythm in many parts of Europe. Sleep came in two parts. First sleep began shortly after dusk and lasted a few hours. Then came the watch, a strange, silent window in the middle of the night, when people woke naturally. Some prayed. Some wrote. Some sat quietly in the dark, reflecting. Some snuck out for visits. Some didn't sleep alone. Then came second sleep, lasting until dawn's gray light stretched through cracks in shutters and the rooster earned his keep. This sleep pattern was normal, expected, even healthy. Because medieval night wasn't just for unconsciousness, it was for intimacy, and not just the physical kind. It was a time to speak without being overheard, to confess, to connect, to ask questions you couldn't ask in daylight. Now close your eyes and imagine a married couple, somewhere deep in a stone manor, lying side by side beneath a heavy woolen blanket. They talk softly about the harvest, about the children, about the strange light in the sky last night. They hold hands, or not. They listen to the fire, and as sleep returns, slowly and quietly, they let it in, not as a thief, but as an honored guest. But of course, not all chambers were peaceful. In taverns, beds were shared by strangers. Yes, shared, if you paid. For a night's rest, you often only paid for half the bed. A traveling merchant on one side, a muddy shepherd on the other, sometimes facing the same way, sometimes not. It was called hotbedding, not romantic, just practical, and as strange as it may sound now. It was part of a world where personal space was small, and trust was currency. Now drift softly into a nun's cell, where a single candle flickers beside a wooden crucifix and a bowl of clean water waits by the bed. She washes her hands, her face, she prays. Then she lies down, fully clothed, in a woolen habit, and stares upward into the dark, listening to the breathing of the sisters around her. There is no perfume, no luxury, just simplicity and silence. And now shift again, gently, to a peasant's home. One room, a low ceiling, a bed shared by parents, with a cradle nearby. Chickens roost quietly in the corner. A dog sighs at the foot of the bed. The baby stirs. A lullaby is hummed, not sung fully, just murmured under the breath. And outside, the wind begins its song through the trees. In this world, night was sacred. It wasn't just something to survive. It was something to surrender to, before sleep. People lit their bed lamps, small ceramic dishes filled with oil or tallow. The light was faint, flickering, fragile. Shadows danced on the walls. People whispered their fears, their hopes. They asked saints to watch over them, Estain Michael. For protection, Estain Apollonia. If their teeth ached, Estain Dymphna. For the nightmares, and then the light was blown out, and the dark took over. It wasn't silent. The night was full. Owls, crickets, the occasional cry, and, if you were very lucky, the sound of distant music from a festival winding down, or the soft notes of a harp played alone in a tower. In those moments, sleep wasn't just rest, it was escape from the pain, the cold, the war, the uncertainty. In sleep, your body forgot the blisters, the hunger, the debts, the pox. And even if your bed was made of straw and your blanket smelled faintly of onions and goat, it was yours, and for a few precious hours, you were safe. And so the fire dies. Not all at once, but in that long, breathless way that embers fade, sighing their last bursts of heat into the stones beneath them. The bed is warm now. The linens scratch at the knees. The air has stilled, heavy with the softness of sleep. But if you listen, really listen, the night never goes quiet. Because medieval darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with sound, with scent, with things that walked without shoes, and things that flew without feathers. Because when the world turned black, and the candles died, a second life began, not one of dreams, but of watchers. Let us return now to a small walled town somewhere. In 14th century France, the gates have been bolted shut. The tavern has closed its door with a groan. But high above the sleeping market square, a lone figure walks, cloaked in wool, hood drawn low, a lantern in one hand, a cudgel in the other. He is the night watchman, and his job is not rest. It is the guarding of it. He walks the wall, walk those narrow ledges behind battlements, checking for signs of fire, of thieves, of anything that doesn't belong in the dark. He mutters the hour as he passes each gate, each tower. Midnight strikes, all's well. May God watch over the sleepers. And somewhere, a dog barks once, then twice. Then silence again. The watchman moves on. Not all guardians were so official in villages. Sometimes it was an elder, or a boy with a bell, or a dog trained to growl at the faintest whiff of something wrong, because danger didn't sleep, and locks were often no more than wooden bars wedged across a door. Windows didn't have glass, just shutters and hope, and the forest didn't keep to its edge. Wolves roamed, so did men who hunted. More than deer, thieves waited for moonless nights. Bandits crept along old Roman roads taught in superstition, that never slept either. Charms were hung by the doorpieces of iron, twigs tied in special knots, holy tokens wrapped in cloth, because if steel couldn't stop the shadows, maybe faith could. And still, the night sang on. The creak of beams overhead, as the house cooled, the snap of frost settling onto rooftops, the whisper of wind crawling under doors, the hush of someone breathing nearby, close enough to hear their dreams. In great halls, servants slept lined up like spoons on the rush-covered floors, their snores soft as wool. In castles, guards paced the outer yards, boots crunching over gravel, while inside, lords and ladies lay behind curtains thick as winter. But even there, safety was illusion, because fire was a constant threat. One tipped candle, one blown ember, and everything furniture, tapestries, walls, could vanish into smoke. That's why night bells existed, not just to mark time, but to signal flame. And if the bell rang after midnight, you rose, you ran, you threw water and prayers in equal measure, because fire didn't care how noble you were. Neither did plague, or ghosts, or sleepwalkers. Yes, they believed in that too. People who rose in the night, eyes open, mouths silent, walking as if led by the hand of something unseen. You weren't to wake them, they said. You were to guide them, back gently, quietly, because something had called them, and you didn't want it to call again. Now, step inside. A monastery, as the bells ring for matenzos. Early, shivering hours before dawn, the monks rise without speaking. Their feet pad across the cold stone floors. They wrap themselves in cloaks and file into the chapel. Candles flicker, chants begin low, slow, like mist in sound form. Not everyone sleeps. Through the night some rise to pray. Some rise because they cannot sleep. Too much memory, too much sorrow, too much of something unnamed pressing on the ribs. In cities, a mother rocks a feverish child. A scribe adds one more line to a scroll by candlelight. A widow pulls a shawl tighter and waits for the morning she's no longer alone, because the medieval night was not for the weak, but it was always for the honest. No masks in the dark, no roles to play, just the hum of your own breath, the weight of your own thoughts, and the company of the old, familiar, dark, and still. Some people worked. Bakers began their day before the sun, stoking ovens while the world still dreamed. Millers stirred to open the water gates. Midwives were summoned in whispers to attend the laboring, whose cries sometimes broke the stillness like bells. In the world of sleep, there were always exceptions. Now let's follow the sounds again. The slow crack of frost. Under boots, the distant bray of a donkey startled in its pen. The soft splash of water as a monk dips a hand into a font, and the almost imperceptible sound of pages turning in the dark, as a lone scholar in a high tower reads by candlelight, lips silently moving with every line. This was night in the middle. Ages, it wasn't quiet. It was alive, with breath, with prayer, with peer, with tenderness, and with the knowledge that morning always came, even if slower than you wished, colder than you hoped, and sometimes without someone who had been there the night before. So next time you lie in your own bed, in your own room, with your door locked and your nightlight glowing, remember they had no such shield. They faced the dark like a familiar ghost, and still they slept, some lightly, some deeply, some not at all, but always with ritual, because night was not the enemy. It was the mirror, and if you listened carefully, it whispered your truest name. And then, the first light. Not sudden, not loud, just a thin, gray shimmer pressing gently against the cracks and shutters, spilling like breath across cold stone floors. The darkness lifts slowly in the Middle Ages, because here, morning is not a time, it's a texture, a rhythm, a ritual wrapped in wool and silence in the peasant's cottage. It begins with smoke. The hearth is stirred, ash shifts, coals glow, a careful hand reaches for kindling, fingers stiff from frost, and a breath is held as flame curls upward, yellow thin, almost shy. The fire is born again, as it must be each day, and with it comes heat, then movement, then life. Children are nudged from straw mats. A pot is set to boil. The dog whines at the door, and in that first hour, before the village truly breathes, the world is quiet enough to hear the creak of rafters, the flutter of a bird waking in the thatch, the soft grunt of a pig shaking off dreams in towns and cities. Mornings begin with bells, not alarms, bells, from towers, from chapels, from high spires wrapped in mist. Matins. Prime, the call to rise. And people do some slowly, some with haste. Servants slip through side passages, hauling water from the well, their buckets swinging, their breaths visible in the dawn air. Apprentices roll from pallets, eyes still red. Reaching for tools they fell asleep beside. Market sellers push carts toward the square, wrapped in cloaks, shouting greetings through the fog. But even for them, especially for them, morning was not rushed. It was observed, because the first moments of the day were believed to set its course. So people prayed, a whispered Ave Maria, a sign of the cross, traced on the brow, a mumbled charm against bad luck, tucked beneath the tongue with the day's first bite of bread. And then came the washing. No showers, no sinks, no hot running water, but still cleanliness mattered. A basin, a cloth. Cold water splashed on the face, the neck, the wrists. In noble houses, servants carried pitchers room to room, pouring water into silver bowls as their masters sat up in beds, heavy with embroidery and sleep. The chill water bit, but it woke you, and in that sting, you remembered who you were. A mother, a scribe, a monk, a child, whoever you had to be that day. And so you washed, and then you dressed, not in haste, in layers, wool, linen, leather, each piece tied or buttoned or laced, pulled over sleep-warm limbs until you were armored once more against the world. And then came food, if there was any, for many. Breakfast was not a feast, it was survival, a crust of bread, a bit of cheese, ale, yes, ale, the same week. Nourishing drink they'd have later, but now sipped from wooden cups in kitchens, still dark. Sometimes pottage if there were leftovers, sometimes fruit, dried or stewed, rarely meat, and only God got eggs this early. In monasteries, breakfast came after morning prayers. In silence, a monk ladles warm broth into a bowl, his hands still red from the cold water of his morning ablutions. He eats slowly, every sound amplified by the hush, the scrape of spoon on wood, the breath caught between sips, the memory of dreams not yet faded. And all around him, others do the same. A shared solitude, and then it's time. The tools come out, the boots go on, the curtains are drawn back, the doors are unlocked. And the day begins, not with noise, but with movement. A man sharpens a scythe, a girl sweeps ashes from the hearth, a merchant lays out his wares, a nun feeds the geese in the garden. Each task its own prayer, each motion its own offering, because morning in the Middle Ages wasn't glamorous. It was earnest, hard, sacred, honest. It came without warning and left without apology. But for those who knew its rhythm, It offered something profound, a beginning. No matter what had happened the night before, what loss, what illness, what dream, what joy morning meant, you had been given another chance to live, to work, to fail, to try again. So, they rose. Every day, some with joy, some with groans, but always with ritual. Because in a world without clocks, without coffee, without smartphones or schedules, the most precious thing you could own was a morning that mattered. And now, the sun crests the trees. The frost begins to crack. The sky turns from slate to silver to gold. And once again, the world remembers itself. Not loudly, not quickly, but fully, just as it always has. And now the light grows stronger. What began as mist along the thatched rooftops has bloomed into gold. It pours down the stone walls, slips through ivy-covered windows, and curls itself across dirt paths, like a hand guiding the living into their day. The medieval world is fully awake now. And with that waking comes the slow, steady drumbeat of labor. Because here, work is not a burden, it is a calling. Whether you are a peasant, a baker, a smith, or a scribe, the hours ahead of you are not just filled with motion, they are filled with meaning. Let us begin where the sun touches first. Out in the open fields, a man bends low, gripping a wooden-handled scythe. His feet are soaked in dew, his breath hangs in the morning air, and before him, acres of grain shimmer. Beneath the sky, he begins to cut, rhythmically, back and forth, sound that becomes its own music. The swish of the blade, the hiss of wheat falling in waves. He doesn't rush. He doesn't stop. He knows this land better than his own skin. His hands have been in this soil since boyhood, and he will die knowing the exact scent of rain hitting plowed earth. He is not alone. Across the village, labor begins in every form. A shepherd whistles low as he untangles his flock from their wooden pen. The sheep pour out, one by one, into the high pastures, bells clinking softly, a lullaby played backward. He walks behind them, staff in hand, eyes on the sky, because weather decides everything in his world. And today, the clouds look thin. A good sign, back in the village. A blacksmith fans the flames of his forge. The heat roars, the iron glows. He works in shirt sleeves, his arms slick with sweat, his leather apron darkened with years of ash and effort. His hammer rings against the anvil in a rhythm older than words. Clang, turn, clang. Again, he does not speak. He does not need to. His work speaks for him. A horseshoe here, a plow repair, there a hinge for the tavern door. And when he wipes his brow, he leaves behind the mark of fire, down the lane. A woman tends her loom. The shuttle flies. Between threads, her fingers dance. She does not look at what she weaves. She doesn't have to. The pattern is in her blood. It came from her mother, and her mother's mother. Passed down like song. Thread becomes cloth. Cloth becomes trade. Trade becomes bread. And she will carry that bread home to her family before the bell rings for midday. In monasteries, labor is holy. The monks divide their hours into ora et labora, prayer, and work. Some tend gardens, some copy manuscripts by candlelight. Their quills, scratching soft as moths against parchment. The letters curl like vines. Margins are filled with little doodles. A rabbit playing, a lute, a snail wearing a crown, a monk chasing a goose. Not because it's allowed, because it's needed. Even the most pious hand craves mischief after hours of ink and silence, and in towns. The labor becomes louder. The cobbler lifts leather and nails. The potter shapes clay. On a spinning wheel, the mason climbs scaffolds, chiseling stone into angels and saints. High above the street where boys chase each other with sticks and laughter. Everywhere, the day hums. Not frantically, not greedily, just deeply, because medieval labor wasn't just about profit, it was about place. You were what you did, a weaver, a thatcher, a brewer, a washerwoman. Your name was linked to your work, literally. That's why names like Smith, Baker, and Tanner still linger today, like echoes in the air, in this world. Hands did everything. No buttons, no motors, no shortcuts, just calluses, tools, and time. Time moves differently here. It was told not by clocks, but by the sun, the bell, the shadow of a post. Against the ground, there were no lunch breaks, but there were pauses. Moments to drink, to sit, to pass a loaf from one hand to another, to sigh, look up, and see a hawk circling far overhead. Not every job was noble. Some were unseen. The gong farmer, who emptied privies under cover of night, the tanner, whose vats of urine and lime stripped hides until the stink sank into his skin forever, the washerwomen, who stood in cold rivers, beating clothes against stones, their arms red and raw, but even they had dignity, because work, however filthy, was still honest. It still put bread on the table. It still kept the wheels of the village turning, and the village, in turn, watched them, with respect, or fear, or both. Children joined in early, by 6 or 7. Most knew how to carry water, gather eggs, mend nets, scare crows, collect dung, spin wool, or trap rats. Play existed. Yes, but it was short. It was wild. It was squeezed between tasks. A stick and a hoop. A wrestle in the grass. A chase through the alley. Then back to chores. Back to helping. Back to growing up too fast. The nobility labored too, though differently. They managed estates. They planned hunts. They heard petitions, settled disputes, oversaw accounts. The lady of the manor might rise at dawn to check the stores, direct the servants, instruct the steward, and visit the sick. She wore velvet, but her hands were rarely idle, because idleness was the enemy. Not just morally, practically if you didn't work. You didn't eat if you didn't move. You didn't survive, and yet, even in the midst of all this labor, the medieval day wasn't joyless. People sang as they worked. They gossiped. They told stories. A plowman whistled a tune older than language. A spinner recited rhymes to the beat of her wheel. A mason etched his daughter's name in the corner of a stone, where no one would ever see it, except perhaps God. Because work was also memory. It left marks on hands, on walls, on time itself. So, now, look again at that long medieval day. It's not just toil. It's testament to resilience, to rhythm, to the quiet miracle of doing the same task, day after day, without applause, and doing it well. Because in this world, the work you did didn't just define you, it became your prayer. And then there was a pause. Not a stop, just a soft easing. The way a cart slows as it crests a hill. The way the last rays of sun stretch long over fields where the scythes have fallen quiet. The medieval day was long, yes, but it wasn't endless, and in between the prayers, the toil, the ache of backs, and the grind of millstones, there were moments, real, full, stubborn moments, where people simply lived, because even in a world defined by labor, rest found a way. It began small. A boy stealing a breath between chores, leaning against a tree, watching ants march like soldiers through the grass. A girl singing to herself while twisting wool, her voice barely louder than the breeze. A man setting down his plow for a moment, not because the field was finished, but because the sky was just so blue, and he needed to look at it. These moments mattered. They were the first seeds of leisure, and when the work was truly done, when the last bell of the day rang out across the rooftops, and animals had been fed, doors bolted, tools cleaned and set aside. That's when the village exhaled, and evening joy began. Not grand, not planned, but deep. It might begin with music, not from a stage, but from a stool beside the hearth, where someone picked up a pipe, or a fiddle, or simply clapped hands and stomped feet. Children gathered near, elders leaned in, and someone would sing. Maybe a ballad of a night lost to love, or a harvest song with a rhythm so steady it felt like heartbeat. Or laughter might ripple through the lane, because someone had a story, and stories were treasured. No one owned them, but some carried them better than others. Old men with mouths, like oak bark, women who spoke with their hands as much as their tongues. Travelers who'd seen 5 cities and 6 ghosts. They told of saints who wept blood, of wolves who spoke Latin, of lovers who leapt from towers into lakes and swam away as swans. And no one asked, is it true? Because truth wasn't the point. Connection was a moment together, in a world that rarely allowed it. Sometimes, the joy came in games, a circle of children, hand in hand, chanting rhymes older than their grandparents, a group of men with dice, clattering on a barrel top, bets placed in turnips or bits of sausage, wrestling in the grass, chasing hens for sport, tugafor, with a rope that had once held a cow and now bound only laughter. Joy didn't need money, it needed room, and when the church allowed it, when the calendar said, "This is a feast day," when labor could wait, festivals burst forth, wild, colorful, chaotic. May Day, Michaelmas, Candlemas, Lammas. Each season had its saints, its spirits, its songs, and the people answered with color. Ribbons in trees, flowers in hair, plates of sweetened bread, apples dipped in honey, roast meats turning over fires, jugglers, minstrels, masked dancers moving through the crowd like dreams. Even the poorest wore their best, because for one day, everyone was someone. Even the rules bent, men dressed as women, children scolded elders. The fool became king, and the king became a fool, if only in a rhyme, or a toast. It wasn't rebellion, it was release. The kind you needed when life was hard, and long, and full of rules that never cracked. But sometimes, even without a festival, rest was sacred. A quiet bench in a cloister garden, a mug of warm ale, after a long week, a nap on a haystack with the sun spilling gold across your knees. Sabbath was a gift, to Dot not just a day off. A reminder that stillness could be holy. That to stop moving wasn't laziness, it was trust that the world would spin without your hand, that the crops would grow without your watch, that your worth was not just in your work. Even the nobility, with their silk robes and long tables, understood leisure as something beyond indulgence. They hunted not just for food, for display, for dance, for the thrill of skill, and horse and horn echoing through the woods. They played chess, with boards of ivory and minds sharpened by diplomacy. They feasted, not always for hunger, but to show power in the form of pleasure. Musicians on every side, dogs beneath the table, banners rippling overhead. But behind the performance, something real shimmered: laughter, sorrow, drunken songs in Latin, half-remembered verses sung with eyes closed. And at the far end of the hall, near the fire, someone always sat watching it all, quietly, with a goblet half full, smiling at the way humanity revealed itself when the plates were cleared. And for the monks, leisure came in simpler ways. A walk through the orchard, an hour in the scriptorium, drawing vines in the margins of psalms, feeding a stray cat by the cloister wall, and pretending it was coincidence. Because joy is not always loud. Sometimes, it is the hum of bees in lavender, the sound of sandals on stone, the smell of baked bread, reaching your nose before the bell calls you in. It is the gentlest rebellion to rest in a world that demands work, and somehow, the people of the Middle Ages understood this more than we might think. They found rest where they could. They created it when it didn't exist. They clung to it not as luxury, but as birthright, because the body could break, the field could flood, the Lord could take what he pleased, but joy, that was yours. To steal, to share, to hoard in your heart, like embers under ash. Waiting to glow. So the next time the world says rest is weakness, or pleasure is waste, remember them: the girl with flowers in her braid, dancing barefoot on a feast day, the boy asleep on his dog in the hay, the woman humming as she stirs her pot, just because the soup smells good, the monk drawing a smiling snail in a Bible, not because he had to, because he could. And now we come to the softest part of the story, the part spoken low, as if not to wake the sick. Because in the medieval world, healing was not just science, it was ritual, it was hope, it was fight, wrapped in herbs and hymns. When the body gave way, when the fever came, or the wound darkened, or the baby would not cry, people turned not to certainty, but to layers of belief and care. And it began, as always, at home, a mother kneeling by the hearth, grinding dried yarrow into powder, a wife soaking linens in vinegar and rosewater, a child sent running to the woods for bark, or berries, or the sweet green of sage. Because in the Middle Ages, medicine grew from the ground, and those who understood it, the midwives, the wise women, the herbalists with stains on their aprons and secrets in their mouths, were guardians of knowledge older than the church, older than kings, older even than fear. They whispered of mugwort for cramps, willow bark for pain, comfrey for broken bones, honey for wounds, garlic for infection. Their books were the fields, their charts were the seasons, and while some were praised, others were watched. Too much healing looked too much like magic, so their craft lived in shadow, not hidden, just quiet like moss. But not all healing came from herbs. Some came from faith, and when illness spread, when the boils rose, when the coughing wouldn't stop, when the smell filled the streets, people reached not for medicine, but for miracles. They lit candles to saints, wore charms against disease, hung amulets of bone and iron, dipped their hands in holy water, walked barefoot to chapels carved into hillsides, and begged, "Heal me. Save me, spare my child." And sometimes it worked, or seemed to, or gave comfort, which in sickness is a kind of cure. But not all were cured. So the village turned to those whose tools were not faith or flowers. They turned to the barber surgeon, a man with a blade, a bucket, and a prayer half mumbled beneath his breath. He did not wear white. He wore leather stained with blood, and when you came to him, you came knowing you might leave lighter, of pain, of poison, or of parts. He pulled teeth, lanced abscesses, set bones, cut open flesh to let out the bad humors, blood, bile, phlegm, and black despair. He worked fast. He had to. There was no anesthesia, only whiskey, a strap between the teeth, and someone to hold you down. And when he was done, he wiped the knife on his apron, said nothing, and moved to the next. He was not cruel. It was necessary, because pain, like war, waited for no one. And yet, not all healing hurt in the monastery. A monk wrote a recipe in Latin for a balm of mint, and beeswax. In a castle chamber, a noblewoman read from Hildegard of Bingen's texts, learning which stones to press against the temple for headaches in the village. A neighbor sat with the dying, holding a hand through the long hours of a final night, not to cure, just to witness, because in the end, that too was medicine to not be alone, to be seen, to be remembered. And yes, there were leeches placed on forearms, ankles, behind the ears, not out of cruelty, out of belief that the body could be balanced, that if the humors were calmed, the soul would follow. And yes, there were failures. So many people died of things we now cure in days. They bled out from splinters. They rotted from childbirth. They vanished beneath the weight of plague, of pneumonia, of winter, and they were buried in haste, in rows, in silence, but still, they fought. They healed with what they had, with roots and ritual, with vinegar and verses, with hands that knew how to wash a body with reverence. And now, centuries later, we walk in their footsteps. Our hospitals glow. Our pills are small miracles. Our machines hum like stars. But the rhythm remains: care, touch, hope, fear, the same. And in some ways, the Middle Ages never left us. They live in the chamomile in your tea, the prayer before surgery, the hand you hold when there's nothing left to do. So let us end here, in a quiet room, a candle burning low, a pot of balm cooling on the table, a breath caught in the throat, not fear. Just the weight of having seen it all. The labor, the laughter, the joy, the drink, the dance, and now, the healing, the full circle. You've walked the medieval day. You've risen in frost, worked in sun, rested in shadow, and faced the darkness with a courage stitched not in steel, but in ritual. And now you sleep, not because you've finished the story, but because for tonight, you've lived it.